So hello, everyone. This is Michael Butterman with the Boulder Philharmonic Orchestra, and I'm very pleased today to be joined by composer Steve Heitzeg, who has written a great deal of music inspired by the natural world and other social causes. And in particular, our audiences may recall our performance of one of his works, actually a movement from a larger work, the movement called Ghosts of the Grasslands, a piece that we did a couple of times in Boulder, and most especially on the concert that we then took to the Kennedy Center to perform at the Shift Festival. And that was part of a concert that was all about the inspiration that composers can take from the natural world, something, of course, that is very much in the fabric of life in Boulder. And so, Steve, I wonder if we could just, or maybe just let me begin by telling you what you probably already know, which is that the several times
Sure.
that I've performed this piece, both in Boulder and elsewhere, the response from the audience has always been incredibly enthusiastic. I mean, it's not a piece that at the end, gets you out of your seats. It doesn't end with, a big bang by any means. There is
Yeah.
something about the piece that is very deeply moving to people. And I know many of them have reached out to you unbidden. And I think that really says something about how, what kind of a connection this makes for people. So I hope you know that, first of all. And I wonder if we can just, for a moment, talk about the larger context of this piece. Where does it come from? Why did you write it? And so on.
Sure. Yeah. But first of all, thank you, Michael, for your, you do a lot of music by living composers commissions. So I wanted to thank you for performing my music. And again, it was a wonderful performance at the Kennedy Center. So I'm very grateful.
Well, thank you.
Very grateful. So yeah, Ghosts of the Grasslands. I wanted to portray the beauty of the plains and the West. And then also there's a beautiful loneliness or the melancholy that might be speaking to some people with the piece. So I wanted to, have a lot of sweeping lines, make it very lyrical, and then mixing in that whole dilemma with the homesteader tension and the indigenous Native American person cultures. So that's why I included guitar as sort of like the iconic instrument of America, the West, very mobile, and then also then honoring indigenous culture and the original inhabitants with the bison and the prairie dogs. So sort of actually having native grasses, gourd rattles, whistling, things like that. So yeah, that's mainly, it's really honoring, it's like almost like an ancient elegy, perhaps.
There is an elegiac and melancholy quality about parts of it, for sure. So I hadn't, I guess, internalized that sense that the guitar maybe represents the homesteaders, or that it is sort of an iconic American Western sound, I suppose you would say.
Yeah, and also since I'm sorry, Michael, I interrupted you. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
of course.
Yes.
No, please.
But also with the guitar as being kind of like it's an iconic protest instrument, musical instrument too, as you think about the 60s or even now, from way back with Memphis Minnie to Lead Belly to Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, that type of thing as I thought about it. So it's really that American musical instrument that really speaks to people, and it does have that Western connection when you think about California and even your Boulder in the American West.
Right. And then there is this, in addition to the section or sections that have the guitar where it's strumming and so on, you have moments where there's this gorgeous melody played by its flute, its horn, its eventually
Thank you.
whistling and so on. Is that, does
Yes.
that have a different, is that representing something different, or is it just sort of all part of the same, I guess, fabric, same feel?
Oh, that's really excellent question. In my mind, when that's a melody that obviously I wrote, but I wanted it to be like a melody that's like really not, it's kind of beyond me. So it's like, maybe it's like just it's this like yourself out in nature. It's really a nondescript sound. It's in between a whistle. It's in between it's like the wind.
Right.
It's just maybe the land itself singing is what I wanted to project, to get out of myself and to represent that beauty, and to really honor the land. And music other than your own, you have to step aside and just, it's similar. Being a composer, you spend a lot of time, not everyone, but not all composers, but myself, is solitary. You're working on something, but then you give the piece. The piece really isn't about you. It's really much bigger, and it's to be shared, and it's no longer mine, really, copyright wise and everything. But universally, in my mind, music is a collective unconscious that is really, we're connecting with ancient music, with future music. It's it's in the grand swirl of things is what you're really trying to connect with.
Well, it really does have that sort of belongs to us all feel. It really is what is the word I'm looking for? It's transcendent, I suppose, in a way. It feels like it's on a different,
thank you,
on a different plane. And
it's always the hope.
Yeah, so I really think it does that. And you also mentioned, just from a sort of nuts and bolts perspective, that you are bringing into the concert hall certain sounds that are created by the natural world. You have bison bones, there's prairie grass bottles. I think I even have the orchestra demonstrate those very briefly.
Yes, that was perfect.
And then, of course, for people in Boulder, I must say, when I first started working with the Boulder Philharmonic, one of the very first aspects of life in Boulder that people talk to me about were the prairie dogs out, especially to the high plains to the east.
Yeah.
It is they are animals, and the sounds of which are very familiar to people who live there. And so how did you ask the orchestra to create that sort of barking sound then?
Well, I've always loved prairie dogs, and so in my mind anyway, and the most playful, and they're very playful to me, and they're very, very cool. So I have the percussionist play squeaky dog toys, because that's kind of the little prairie dog hoot. So at the very close of the piece, because this whole movement sort of builds and builds and builds, and then it's honoring the bison, Native American culture, the merging of people hopefully living together peacefully post all of that conflict. And then we've got the prairie dogs in the whole mix. So it kind of ends that way, since it's a protest. The one I was going to mention, a book, since she's a wonderful writer, Terry Tempest Williams, who lives in Utah, environmental activist and writer. Her book, if anybody's really interested in prairie dogs, post this. Her book, Finding Beauty in a Broken World, she wrote after 9/11.
Huh.
And it's all about the prairie dog town in Bryce Canyon. And so she spends, I forget how many months with the prairie dogs, and a researcher out there. And it's really a great expose on, or just insight into the life of prairie dogs.
And were her writings something that you were familiar with when you were composing this work?
Yes, yeah. And I've subsequently been able to meet her and set two of her poems, because she writes beautiful poetry and just a wonderful person for the environment. But yeah, they live right outside of Salt Lake City.
Is that right?
So Terry Tempest Williams.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope our viewers will.
So you've been out to the prairie dogs, so it's east of town then? Because I looked here, it's called, what is it? The Open Space and Mountain Parks.
Yes. So
the prairie dogs are.
Primarily to the west of Boulder are the mountains, essentially. So we're talking about
the west.
Yes. So we're talking about to essentially to the east. It's the high plains, and the Open Space and Mountain Parks is actually it's a whole agency, a public agency in Boulder with a tremendous amount of green space that it manages, and we have a relationship with them through someone named Dave Sutherland, who is actually our naturalist. He is leading many of our...
Oh, is that the person who did the nature walk and everything?
Correct.
Okay.
Many of our guided musical hikes, in fact, all of our guided musical hikes are are curated by
Right.
him,
Okay.
and he came to Washington D.C. with us
Yeah.
as part of our residency there. I think we're the only orchestra in the country that has a naturalist on staff, to my
That's
knowledge.
very cool. That's very cool.
I think it is pretty cool, actually.
Naturalist in residence, really. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Wow.
Naturalist in residence. Um, Let me ask you. There's something else that people have mentioned when they've heard this piece is that what was the film for which it was written? And I always,
Oh,
yeah, I always respond. Well, it is a piece of concert music. It was part of a symphony, actually. But you have written, of course, music for I know television and film.
yes.
And so is there? Do you? uh, I know that many people had in mind in their imaginations, a kind of
Mhm.
scene anyway as they were listening to that piece. Do you ever
That's good.
compose? Let's say you're not writing specifically for television or film. Do you ever compose with a visual image in mind, or is it something that
Oh,
people
yes.
make
Yeah.
come up
Yeah.
with?
For me, and every composer is different, but yes, the visual either internally or, if you've been to a space. So, and I particularly love the high plains. One of my favorite places, the Mojave Desert, Joshua Tree, and all that. So I wanted to, I grew up on it's on the end of the plains in southern Minnesota on a dairy farm. So Breezy Hill Farm is the name of the farm, and it blows. It's windy most of the time. So that's like the flat grasslands. More of just the plains, whereas the high plains is more your area, and there's a different vibe there, and just it's very cool. I love the open expanse of the West and all of that. So
Yeah.
that's really what was in my mind. Um, I've been to Boulder, Denver, but I haven't been to the Prairie Dog Town. I didn't know about that until after I'd been there. So I've been out, west, the Sonoran Desert. Speaking of that, of cool composers, the John Luther Adams, his whole series, The Becoming Desert, because he has a place down the Sonoran Desert. Fabulous piece, and plus his Becoming Ocean is another wonderful. So, but yeah, that whole sort of vibe is, but I didn't have a particular place in mind, but I am always pleased when people feel that something's cinematic, because then that means that the piece spoke to the person. They conjured up a visual, a storyline. That's,
Right.
that's what it's all about.
They made a personal connection to it.
Yes.
Somehow.
Yeah. That's the hope and the goal, at least for me as a composer, to connect. Because I could sit around and just write music, but it's really to have that dialogue and communication is what's really so important. Even if it wasn't my own music, it's just because I'm listening to other music. There's all kinds of brilliant composers out there. It's just phenomenal. It's really, I don't know what we do without music.
Well,
So,
especially in times like this, we
yeah,
find ourselves even more so looking to the arts to kind of ground us in our the common human condition, and to kind of lift our spirits and allow us to transcend the sort of temporary isolation that many of us
yeah.
are feeling right now. Actually,
That's very true. That's very true, Michael. And I mean, the arts are essential to civilization and humanity. It's just, it's absolutely, without the arts, it's just, we wouldn't be who we are. We wouldn't make it.
no,
So,
quite right. Well, and I just in sort of wrapping up, I wanted to just mention that I know you've written a great deal of music that is socially conscious and or inspired by the natural world. So anyone who has heard this piece and who enjoys it, I would commend them to really all of your music, which I know that much of which they can probably find links to and little samples of at least here and there. But I want to make sure that I hope that we can find a way to share more of your music with our. I know we can with our audiences in
thank you,
in
Michael.
Boulder in coming seasons, because I just think there's a spirit about the way that you approach writing that is very much in keeping with I think, the frame of reference and the frame of mind that many folks in Boulder possess. So I'll just state that for the record, as it were, that I'm looking forward to.
Well, I'm very humbled by your words, and thank you very much. And my compliments for your support of new music and just doing all of that for living composers and the living art. So, but hopefully we'll get to meet in person and do something in the future too. But I'm very grateful for your support. So thank you.
Well, it's certainly my personal pleasure and my professional one as well. So let me just thank you for taking some time to speak with me today. And I would ask all of the folks who have watched this interview to then please continue with the performance from the Kennedy Center, which should be presented, I believe, right next to this interview that you've just seen. So give that a look. It's about 10 minutes or so long, and just a wonderful piece if you haven't heard it, and of course if you already know it, a chance to relive some wonderful music making in a special place. So again, Steve, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.